In Italy, so you see the title of my talk today. In Italy, the issues of so-called political correctness and cancel culture have become a heated topic only recently, especially in the past decade or so, with the growing voice of second-generation Italians and Afro-descendants. The context of heightened cultural sensitivity towards hate speech has proven to be very divisive in a national culture that is still largely monocultural and whose politics and jurisprudence are arguably behind with respect to diversity, inclusion, and social equality as compared to many of our European neighbors. During the past few years, Victor Osimhen, a Nigerian star of the Naples soccer team, has been celebrated and appropriated as a recognizable costume character for carnival and for general sports celebrations and games, almost exclusively by younger kids, younger fans who would revere him as some kind of superhero. A few of them actually went blackface in their Osimhen costume. This is the starting point of my presentation here, an event that inspired my interest in the circulation of blackface, specifically in southern Italy. Let me start with Osimhen, the 24-year-old striker who is one of the most sought-after players in Europe, has been wearing a face mask following a collision during a match in November 2021, which left him with multiple fractures to his left orbital and cheekbone. In the long wave of celebrations for Napoli soccer team, which is on its way to win the national championship, last February, news reported that a few children started to wear blackface when impersonating their champion, Osimhen. On social media, in a video that has gained millions of views, a user showed a boy, apparently 5 or 6-year-old, dressed in Napoli jersey with a mask and blackface to look like Osimhen. A Nigerian Neapolitan writer, Sabrina Efionai, took to Facebook to criticize parents for allowing their children to use blackface during a carnival. Roberto Mancini, the Italian team manager, swiftly took to Instagram to hit back at Efionai's criticism, posting an image of young fans in their Osimhen outfits. Sport is inclusion and you kids are giants. Soccer culture in Italy, and more broadly in Europe, in the past few years has been the arena for vicious racist attacks on players by competing team fans, and most of the leagues have worked in the direction of punishing racist behaviors and encouraging the celebration of a multiracial team. So Mancini's reaction may be understandable. After all, on a basic level, what we are seeing is a city celebrating a black champion as their own. In sport culture, there is a degree of objectification of an athlete on the basis of its successful performance. And if the athlete is black, there may be powerful historical resonances in this celebration, as director Ava DuVernay shows in her Netflix series Colin in Black and White. It is precisely this historical awareness that seems to be lacking in accusation of cancel culture or censorship related to blackface. The Ghanaian Neapolitan writer and activist Jara Khan straightforwardly argues that these phenomena are not blackface. They are something worse than that. Because blackface is a racist art form with clear criteria and a history, and it is meant to mock and ridicule stereotypical aspects of an entire people, not to imitate as an intended homage, however disturbingly, one celebrity in particular. Khan stresses precisely the historical burden behind these expressions that do not have racist hatred as their motivation. She states, quote, "Being imitated by whites in voice, movement, and even in skin color is the worst nightmare for every colored artist, dead or alive. There is a story behind this," end quote. And she explicitly refers to the history of cultural appropriation in show business. These appropriations, even when allegedly celebratory, reduce you, quote, to an object of fetishism, not a subject who creates and shares cultural products, end quote. Other examples of blackface abound in Italy in the last few decades. Let's just look at the extraordinary moment when one of the most celebrated, oh no, what if I just hit randomly? Yes. So one of the most celebrated pizza maker in Naples, Gino Servillo, went blackface on his social media as a protest against a racist episode on the soccer field, in solidarity with black Napoli player Koulibaly. To what extent does the circulation of blackface in Italy require new paradigms to be effectively understood? What is the history of blackface in Italy and its relation with the North American blackface? Investigating the category of blackface as it circulates in Italy may be a rich topic to explore, also in relation to US cultural hegemony. Have we Italians just imported blackface, both its practice and the outrage it ignites, from the US, the way we import, say, Halloween or baby showers? Let me go a few months back. So, really, it all started last summer. I was walking around the Spanish Quarter neighborhood in Naples with a few colleagues from Tulane University in New Orleans and from Tangier, Morocco, who had come to Naples for a meeting of a newborn research group on global port cities. I was with Nico Pierre Aziz, a Haitian New Orleanian artist and museum curator who stopped midway staring at some street art, one of the many contemporary murals for which my city is also famous. I followed his glance. On the wall on the side of a building, the face of an iconic Neapolitan comedian from the 50s and 60s, Totò, one of the first local modern actors who came from poor classes and rose to national stardom. The scene was from a 1962 film of his. And he was wearing blackface. I volunteered to Nico as a cultural mediator. Oh, no. He's an icon, a very famous Neapolitan actor, rather progressive. No, blackface here is not, we don't have a history of blackface here. Nico seemed convinced. Okay. And we kept walking. No follow-up, not that week anyway. But obviously that was the beginning of a path I didn't know I was going to walk. Later, I wondered about the reasons behind my disavowal of the issue of racist blackface in Italy. I fully acknowledge several other instances in varying degrees of intentionality and awareness whereby racism manifests itself in Italy. Housing, job opportunity, media, political discourse, even everyday interaction on public transportation. Furthermore, as a queer Southerner, it's surprising how resistant I was to acknowledge hate speech and stereotyping and the evidence that discursive practices have an emotional and psychological impact on marginalized communities, regardless of the intentions of the producer. I also wonder what role had my own transnational adulthood into embracing an uncompromising cultural relativism. Not only people around the world do things differently, of course, but the same thing or behavior may have quite a radically different meaning from place to place. Context is fundamental in assessing the limits between cultural appropriation and appreciation, fetishization, or fascination. Furthermore, as a scholar who focuses quite often on minorities and indigenous culture, I tend to value and celebrate the capacity to change paradigms and to consider epistemological shifts when exploring a different culture and community. Clearly, none of these considerations came to rescue me in the particular case where I, as a white man, was contemplating what behavior was potentially racist and which one wasn't. So let me provide here some notes on blackface in the US before moving to the Italian context. Blackface is closely associated in the United States with the performance genre of the minstrel show, one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the country through the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, and for some critics, the very first truly American art form, the production of an imagined blackness by white people. Eric Lott, in his landmark book, Love and Theft, Blackface Minstrelsy and the American Working Class, borrowing in part from Homi Bhabha's concept of colonial mimicry, explores dynamics of envy and fascination, desire and fear underlying the success of the genre. White performers, as much as audiences, were afraid of black groups rising up and taking the power, and blackface allowed them to evoke the specter while symbolically taking control over it. Blackface is the white fantasy of black inferiority. But more than this, if we highlight the contextual massive migration of poor and working class whites from Europe at the time, we realize that through the blackface, white minority groups like Irish, Jewish, Italian, Southern Europeans became white and became American, joining white privilege as a structural component of citizenship and marking the difference with blacks. Blackface served the purpose of displacing a collective fear of black people by domesticating, objectivating, and simplifying them. Paradoxically, it also served as a way of appropriating desired qualities of this fantasized blackness, especially with regards to the body, the music, the dancing, the singing, allowing white performers and white characters on stage to access a liberated, truer version of themselves. The line between appreciation and appropriation, love and theft indeed, gets blurry. Now, understanding that blackface is the result of an enduring social anxiety and instability that must be framed intersectionally and primarily in relation to class and citizenship, may be a good starting point to assess the issue within the Italian context. By this, I don't mean to dismiss their significance as a racist tradition, but rather I want to highlight how racism has always worked in complicity with other categories of oppression and marginalization. The scholar Leonardo De Franceschi, who works primarily on Afro-descendant Italian cinema, highlights a European genealogy of the blackface, or more specifically, a Mediterranean genealogy. The use of dark masks, burnt cork, and other ways to darken an actor's face evoke the tradition of the mystery plays of the late Middle Ages. The Nobel Prize winner Dario Fo reminds us that the first Harlequin in history, the actor Tristano Martinelli in 1600, did not wear a black mask, but he was actually in blackface. The acknowledgement of this disavowed blackness at the heart of the Commedia dell'arte would require further investigation to shine a new light on these modern black masked stock characters of trickster servants, who are incidentally often equipped with musical instruments like the Neapolitan pulcinella or zani. Harry Louis Gates, in fact, writes that the African connection we see with the character of the Black Harlequin is due to the image of the black slave that was then appropriated in the late 18th century through three very famous British plays, among which Harlequin Mungo, that would be at the root of the US minstrel show. Another possible source would be the puppet theater, especially the tradition that staged the battles between French paladins and Saracens, or Moors, since the Middle Ages. So clearly, blackface is aimed at displacing anxieties that are cultural, economic, psychological, regarding the inclusion of a new population in the networks of modern capitalism. But it has deeper roots in the definition of European identity and alterity across the Mediterranean. It is therefore necessary to delineate a common genealogy for different performance genres like Elizabethan drama, mystery plays with figure of black devils, the Commedia dell'arte, and the puppet theater. Now, in the final section of this talk, I want to go back to Naples and the central question of the racialization of the South and the nexus between the Italian South and the global South. Before national unity in 1861, Naples, I don't know what's going to happen, okay. Naples was at once the direct result of cultural interaction with the Mediterranean basin. Actually, I'm going to go back. So at once, interaction with the Mediterranean basin and at the forefront of European modernity, especially during the golden era of the 17th and 18th century, when it became one of the main urban and cultural centers in Europe. Its decline increased after the unity in through the early 20th century. Racially, because of its history as a major port, the former kingdom of Naples was significantly diverse if compared to the rest of the country, and racial mixing was not uncommon, as we can also see, for example, in many cultural visual representation of city life from the early modern era. Antonio Gramsci, who was both a proud southerner from Sardinia and an internationalist, wrote the landmark essay The Southern Question in 1926, in which he critiques northern industrial capitalism, writing that, quote, the northern bourgeoisie has subjugated southern Italy and the islands, reducing them into colonies for their exploitation, end quote. Gramsci attacks, among other things, the positivism of criminal sociology and anthropology by scholars like Cesare Lombroso, which were instrumental in the late 19th century in providing a scientific base to criminalization and racial discrimination against Southern Italians, who were understood as inherently backward, primitive, and impossible to civilize. Positivism provided a status of scientific truth to racializing views of Southerners, reinforcing a racial conflict between North and South, stressing the inferiority of the South and developing the narrative of the South as a burden, a lead ball for the nation. This nexus between race, class, and nation, as it has been developed in Italy from the late 19th century, is central to my argument. As I move toward my conclusion, I want to go back to where I started from, Totò in Blackface, from Totò Truffa, 62, which means Totò Scam. The movie is about two Neapolitan conmen in Rome, and it's a series of vignettes in which the two, Totò and Nino Taranto, impersonate several characters, diving into all kinds of stereotypes while deceiving upper-class people in order to extort money and typically pretending to be figures of authority. For example, they cheat an Italian American who is fooled into thinking he can buy the Trevi fountain from the owner. Underneath the mode of the Italian comedy, the film is arguably all about class conflict and strategies of survival by underdogs in a hostile economic environment. The two men identify as two transformists actors who have lost their jobs. They live together in a humble rental they can't afford, and the film is interestingly almost devoid of female characters, except, significantly, Totò's fictional daughter, who studies in an upper-class boarding school. Her education is the reason why the protagonist needs all this money. The infamous scene here, about 4 minutes long, is when they are pretending to be the ambassador of Katonga and his secretary, who meet with a naive white person and try to take a good sum of money from him. The makeup is not quite right, but the reference to blackface is unquestionable. The white gloves, a broken Italian language, they hint to a barely submerged primitiveness in the characters who are wearing nose rings. This is 1962. Algeria has just become an independent nation, and it's really too late for this kind of crassly racist representation. But again, in Italy at that time, there was apparently no widespread sensibility nor any influential community that would voice its outrage. What I find interesting, though, in the ambassador scene is that from the very beginning, the characters mix Neapolitan language in their blackface performance. For every few words they speak in broken Italian, there are a few in Neapolitan. As if just barely beneath the burnt cork, there were Neapolitans struggling to come out. And it seems to me that they are at the same time signifying upon and impersonating the stereotype of two Neapolitans who are naturally inclined, driven to deceit and illegality, experts in the art of getting by, so stereotypically associated to Naples. A big part of their audience is not Neapolitan. So the performance of Neapolitanness hidden in blackface is also for a national audience to enjoy. At the end of the scene, when they are close to grabbing the money from their victim, they have to rush out because the real ambassador is coming back to his office. The real diplomats, two elegantly dressed black men, then run into them in the corridor in a unique moment when originals and degraded copies face each other. And according to Giovacchini, quote, it is a rare moment when history meets its racist and dehistoricized mythology. For a brief moment, the distorted image in the racist mirror of Western cinema meets its original. The brief encounter reveals that whereas the traditional genre was meant to stress black inferiority, here the two real black actors are elegantly dressed and behave coherently as members of a cosmopolitan elite, in the process dramatizing how ridiculous the body and costumes of the two Neapolitans in blackface look. To conclude, I would like to juxtapose two images. On the one hand, Totò on national television, on the other, the child in blackface in the streets of the city center, whom I imagine surrounded by tourists who want to take a selfie with him. Self-exoticization by Neapolitans for the eyes of the foreigners is a very real possibility. As we put up a show for tourists, national and foreign, to take a photograph, be amused or appalled. When tourism is the only game in town, and when poverty, truancy, and unemployment are among the highest in Europe, we turn ourselves into disposable commodities for outsiders to consume, exaggerating some of our own traits to lure non-natives in order to get an economical advantage or a transitory recognition from the outside. This performance betrays a structural disadvantage and subalternity of many Neapolitans in relation to the global flow of capital and mass tourism. The exploration of blackface has revealed a core of controlling anxieties and fears about class and citizenship that link European modernity, the US postbellum era, with the Italian 20th century, and the continuing work of excavating one's own history. Thank you.